All right, we are back. Another episode, Two Kings Challenge. Frank McFarland here with Brian King. Been another week down. We're getting, I think this is week number 5.
I believe this is 6, actually. Yeah.
Is it episode 6 or is it week 6?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think it's week 5, episode 6.
Mm-hmm.
We may be off on that, but it's been another kind of wild week in this this challenge. It's required Brian to have his bacon this morning. On Thursday, maybe there's some lactic acid built up or something. I don't really know what all bacon is good for, but at least you get some fat here started in the morning to get you going, ready to talk about all the big progress that Asheville's made.
It's it's a good morning when you have bacon and coffee. So we'll crank up. It's been an exciting week. Still a lot of things going on. It's just a reminder how slow some of these things are. It's a little funny because we want these things to happen immediately. That's just the way it runs, and a lot of times it feels like things happen overnight. But when you're actually going through it, you realize exactly how detailed things is, how much communication it takes to fill out a team, to make sure that you've got the facilities that you want and all these things. So I think you've got a good episode in store, kind of tightly packed, and a lot of good information for anybody that's got a chance to listen today.
Yeah, I think we're going to talk numbers a lot today. We are not, math majors at this, but we do spend a lot of time in numbers every week. I'm going to start with one in terms of Charlotte that is probably the most promising that we have seen so far, which comes from Tom's, numbers for the past week, which really, really took a huge step up. Had kind of been a slow start into Charlotte, but I know he had 3 days of court last week, and the numbers reflected that. I think maybe even having the highest build amount in the firm for the week, which is a pretty promising sign, better than anything going on in Asheville.
Well, I must admit, I would just say it's I would call it a slow start. I'd say it's a steady start. I'm aiming towards a April 1st jump that's going to occur, and we're going to be ramped up pretty tight on that. A lot of my time is still backstage. I have I'm in tough contract negotiations with an attorney that I believe is going to bring some cases with them and really jumpstart the Asheville office in a way it hasn't had. But I have been impressed with your Charlotte numbers. Let's talk a little bit about what those numbers look like.
Well, and I think probably one of the best places that we can start with this is by showing really what numbers do we care about. And I want to talk through some of the challenges that we have. One of the things that we've really been trying to develop too is our ability really to measure what's happening office by office. So Clio, which we use, has a lot of different functions and reports that work well for us to measure, what kind of money are we bringing in from certain people, what cases are bringing in, what practice areas, how those things are doing. We have kind of had to create our own internal system for dividing cases on location. That's not something that's built in. So we're going to talk through that, but understand that when we show these numbers and we walk through these numbers, these are really like the firm-wide numbers that we look at every single week. How are we doing? This is kind of where our goals are, and what we hope to get. And you can see kind of where here as they're pulling up, sort of where these things change and have changed. You can see the start of 2021, and then kind of as they develop up through the start of this year, which I don't know. Did you? Yeah. Okay. Just the run.
Yeah. You can see these are our goals going back to 2021. That we go through these every Thursday. It is so important at least for the two of us, that we know the health of the firm by being able to look at just what really comes down to 7 numbers to to go through. So maybe we can bounce back and forth and kind of talk about what we're looking for in each one.
Yeah, and the first one that we put on that list is it's the most important number, right? It's the one that matters the most. But I think what we have found is how much correlation that number draws from the rest of these numbers. So we start with revenue, we start with weekly revenue. And what we have found over time is that the trends tend to follow along, on the other parts of this puzzle. And if we get where we need to be on our leads and our appointments, then even if that weekly revenue number is behind, we have the ability to grow there. But that's the number that we start with. And, you can see here on this chart what kind of growth that we've had over the last year. But that's been challenging in terms of goal planning too. How do you set goals when you have a start of 21 like we did, at that goal number, and then where we are this year in terms of the number of attorneys we've added. And, there's plenty of pieces to this puzzle. It's not just everybody's, we're billing clients twice as much or whatever. That, there's so much to this story, but at the same time, that is, it shows some of the challenges. And I think that's where when we're planning, you have your more realistic goals, and then you have your real goals, which I know 10X has done a lot for me on that front. But if you would have said a couple of years ago, is 192,000 a week a realistic goal? I think we all would have probably said, maybe. I mean, probably not. And so now to be there and that be realistic where we're at, we have to change the way we think about what our long-term goals are, I think. So, that's the first number that we start with. Probably too much time on it, but it's the most important one, but it is also heavily dependent on these other ones.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that oftentimes when you're talking about the health of large businesses, they stack revenue sometimes a little bit too far back. I mean, you got to remember, it's important that you're making money every week. And we have some very specific feelings about the way we want to divide that money up. And we have a percentage format for that. But yes, I think, it's ridiculous sometimes. I think that people anticipate what things need to be and those things. You got to make sure that you're making money. So revenue has to be first. The second number that we look at there is leads. And, for me, it took a while just to understand what a lead was. And I think that is very important for anybody who's looking at business, is to understand what a lead is, because you are not going to be able to say, okay, there are 2 million people in my market that I serve, so I have 2 million people to go after. If you do that, you better be Coke or McDonald's or Microsoft or Apple if you're truly going to go after 2 million people. It's ridiculous to even think of that kind of concept in the practice of law. Most people in life do not need a lawyer every day. They don't. They're going to need lawyers at certain points of their life, or they're going to need lawyers in some kind of commonality form of their life, like in business or occasional, whatever those pieces are. But for the most part, a lawyer is somebody who is going to have a significant impact on about 10% of the population. So you have to identify what an actual lead is. And for us to identify a lead, it has to be a name of a person with a legal issue or question, and a way to contact them. That may be just an email. It may be a phone number. It may be a chat box. Whatever that is, we have a moment in time that person is an actual lead for us. And we identify that. And, I think that what's so important, people worry a lot about advertising, which is trying to develop leads. Well, if your billboard is seen by 10,000 people, but you don't know what 10,000 people they are, those aren't leads. Those are people driving by your billboard. A person, your advertising that can actually generate somebody plugging their name in or their email address or whatever it is, that's what makes them a lead. And we need, as a firm right now, as you can see, we go for 254 of those a week, which is in some ways a daunting number. In other ways, you think in terms of the millions of people that our law firm footprint covers, kind of paltry. I mean, if we can do that much, we can. And, you know, for that to be Charlotte or Asheville, where a city like Charlotte of, you know, debatably 3 million people in that market, and all you're trying to get is about 10% of that number, 26. Can you get 26 leads out of the whole city of Charlotte? Starts to make you realize that it is a possibility for that.
Yeah, and as we work through these are just, again, these are firm wide, but I think the goal, and one of the goals for today, or at least maybe as we head into next week, is to be able to have a breakdown like this for Charlotte and Asheville that we're able to do, especially as we get towards the end of this thing. I think that'll be one of the keys in deciding, you know, who has been more successful in all those parts there too. But yeah, leads is this, you know, that's the top of the funnel. You know, that's where everything else comes from. You will hear leads described different ways depending on what company you're talking to. I know Google, at least for one, is one that considers a lead. You know, like they talk maybe about clicks or, you know, things like that happen. We break it down a little bit further, which I think makes sense for us, meaning, you know, if somebody clicks and they never call us, you know, maybe they come back later, but there's just no way for us to measure that, you know. And when you deal with things like this, and especially in advertising sources, this is important. Being able to track where things come from is one of the things that I look for the most, or one of the things that I appreciate the most when we get our reports on our marketing side of things, because, you know, knowing where, you know, where do the cases grow on trees? No, of course they don't grow on trees, but where do they grow? And, you know, those questions are tough. It's one of the things that I think kind of maybe they're not as successful with, you know, maybe they're not as successful overall as kind of your old school marketing approaches, but you know when they are successful and you can put a dollar for dollar on it. So we always try to put measurables on, you know, whatever it is that we're doing in terms of programs. And sure, there are times where if you do something for a month and your cases double, you're going to think, well, hey, that's because we did X, but that correlation is not always direct. So how do you measure those things between? But then moving from that, really more important even than the leads themselves are who's calling us to make these appointments. And I'm going to combine these two. I know they're very similar, but there are some differences. But, you know, what appointments are we setting, and then how many of those appointments that we're setting are showing up for the appointment? So those two work hand in hand, but there are differences. And one of the biggest parts about that is, how do we get from, you know, from a sales standpoint, that getting from the the call to the appointment set is the most important time. We're not cold calling people though. You know, these are people that are calling us that are wanting our services already. So there are some differences, but it's still a very important piece of this. And it's one that our client services team, you know, that's where we work really at with them about making sure that these people that call and that they set this appointment, that they're showing up. We do have a consultation fee. We keep it relatively small at $50, but, you know, so that's a deterrent. You know, most of these people that you see on that set to show, I think probably fall into that category. But from the leads to appointment set, again, that breakdown is another big one that our client services team is working on every day.
It is, I consider the leads to appointment set more important than our advertising numbers, more important than our marketing or anything else. We know that there are, like I said, 10 to 15% of the segment of society that needs a lawyer right now, that they're going through some kind of issue, something as simple as buying a house, which is, you know, we don't do those real estate transactions, but so, you know, buying a house, something simple, all the way to being charged with a felony or going through a divorce or something that's that intense, not only do they have a need, but it's a need that cannot be met anywhere else. They can't go to Walmart and buy a lawyer. They cannot go on Amazon and buy a lawyer. They have to make an appointment or make some kind of way to contact that law office. So for us, if we can identify those people, we expect them to be able to make those appointments. And frankly, we expect if we can make those appointments for them to become clients, which is the next step of conversion. It is ridiculous how much money law firms will spend on just trying to get leads when what they really need to do is convert the people that call. And what we do not want is a busy paralegal who is working away on a case to have to stop everything and answer the phone. So even if it's Asheville or Charlotte in our challenge, that's still going to go through our intake team, and we can't keep our intake team big enough because we're constantly tinkering and trying to make that team efficient to where if you call our office, you get a first ring, you say you're a new client, you're immediately talking to one of our intake team who is caring, listening, and trying to do everything they can to make sure you get from where you are right now to that appointment. And when that appointment gets set, then we go out of our way to make sure, from an immediate text message to a return phone call to everything we can do to make sure that that person is going to be there sitting in the office or on the phone or on Zoom talking to a lawyer that next day. Then what we spend a lot of time on, the two of us, is to train our attorneys, because generally speaking, we like to have consultations with an attorney, and we have that attorney ready to convert that person into a client, not because we're trying to sell necessarily, but because we know they have a legal issue that needs a lawyer. And that's really what we try to tell our attorneys to do, is to be very clear with your questioning and ask the question, does this person have a legal need? And is it a legal need that King Law can take care of? If those two things are true, then you need to, that person needs to be walking out with a client engagement agreement or a signed client engagement agreement that gets us involved in the case so we can get to work. And that's where conversion is. We do not want 100% conversion. We're not selling widgets or clothes or cool T-shirts. We don't want everybody that comes into our store to buy. Why? Because they may not need a lawyer. It may not be something that we want. And quite frankly, they may be a kind of client that's just not a good match for our office. I mean, we're not a government employer. I mean, we can pick and choose who we want as clients, and quality of life means a lot to us. So we're looking for a group of very segmented people that can afford our services, that we can take care of, or in some ways we have ways to work around and make sure that they can get a lawyer. And then the ones that are just like, this is not going to be a good fit for us, let's find them another place where they can.
Yeah, and I think one of the coolest things to look at for me when you go through these charts, you look at the top one. We started 2021, 130. We start 2022, 190. That's just a huge gap. It looks humongous to get there. But when you get down to conversion, and you realize that, look, to have that bounce, that almost 20% bounce at the end of 2021, it only took 6 retains a week, and then moving from that into where we're at this year, 9 retains a week. Those numbers seem very doable when you're talking about the cases that we're meeting with. They seem doable even if you look at 115 shows or 103 shows that we had before. If we can get to 135 people showing up for appointments, all of a sudden it becomes really easy to get there to those numbers. And it really is, there's such a direct correlation between these. We know that we'll get there, pretty much, if we can get to those numbers. And the other one that it moves to is the amount billed. Obviously, we are doing, as we talked about before, we do the majority of our work is trust billing. So we're billing off of cases that, it's not flat fees. So they are, we have to have money in trust in order to get paid on that time that we're working. We know every year over year, it doesn't matter what changes, it doesn't matter how much we grow, you can almost pencil this thing in at the percentage that it's at. And that's where we're at on these numbers, from the amount that we bill to the amount that we collected. And so you can see that here, we just need to be over it, and it's about 20% that we need to be over it. So, that is such another big piece to the puzzle, and one thing that we really focus on with our reports. One of the things that we changed, I guess a couple years ago or so now, we started a program that we call TGIF, which is like a Friday afternoon incentive that we use. And basically, we put this number. What I've done every single year is put this number in, divide it out, from our goal to where we get to, set each attorney with that target to get there based on, what rate they're billing at and, what their position is. And if they hit that number, then they get TGIF. And, last week, it's over half that get there every week. I don't know exactly where those numbers play out, but one of the things that, not just beating people over the head with numbers, which I know has been an issue for us occasionally, it became more of a perk. And I think we saw some pretty instant impact from that, and it's been one that we haven't really shied away from keeping after. But when you look at this big number and then you start breaking it down, and one other thing I'll just talk about briefly too is that in terms of Charlotte and Asheville, if you want to play these numbers out, which we plan to do before next week, I don't think we're going to have time today to do that, but you really want to start at a little bit below 20,000 on that weekly revenue for each office, kind of as where our goal marks are. So starting there, then you can kind of break these down based on those on that percentage. But that's what would get us to where we want to be at the end of this 90 days. And, for reference, like last week, we had a really good week. Tom was at, almost 10. And let me see if I can find, let's say last week we were probably at 13 or 14. So that shows where we need to grow. That's also the best week we've had though. So, it's not like we're hitting those consistently right now, but that's where we are. So we definitely, I'd say we need to about double what production level we're at right now. And part of that, could mean another attorney or a case manager, but that's really where we are week over week.
Yeah, those are our key numbers, what we just went through. We do track 3 other numbers that I think are important, and one of them I think is particularly important for us. But I'll just go right through those pretty quickly. We have for the overall firm, you can see that we have a collections number. That is money that we're trying to get that is over 90 days due. That is a ongoing issue and an ongoing struggle, but and one that we still kind of handle office wide as opposed to by our particular branches. You also see something that you'll never see in another business, and that's our trust balance. A lot of our clients have put money in trust, so they have prepaid for some legal services. That's a really good number for us to understand what we need to do hiring wise and those things, because we need to make sure that the people who have paid us are being taken care of. And then the other one, which I do think is important for us, and that is the number of reviews. We really spend a lot of time trying to make sure that our Facebook and our Google reviews are as close to 5 stars as possible. You've heard us talk about this in this podcast before, and it really emphasizes how important it is for each one of us that we have a good, strong review base, and that is as high as possible. And that if there is a 1-star review that comes in, and remember, with the practice of law, If we're against to somebody, they can write in. If an uncle thinks that this case is going too slow or the judge didn't rule correctly, they can 1-star us. And it's a real issue. We want to make sure that the public sees lots of stars on our stuff, and that's why we survey every client on multiple occasions to try to get as many star reviews as possible. And I know that's something you're really trying to focus in Charlotte.
Yeah, and we do that good or bad. I mean, we want to hear from people. I know we want the good ones, but and that's we believe that we're putting that kind of service out there, but occasionally that does backfire too. So we want more reviews, period, because we think that's going to balance out, in the favor that we want to be. But yeah, reviews are important. There are some of these, like collections is an area we could probably spend a whole day on too, to just say like, hey, here's where potentially we could be. Here's all this money that gets left out there because, I know that just quickly, and I know we're up against time here today. We started a little bit later, but collections is one that, there's this bad, lawyers have this bad reputation about, hey, they're going to bill you for everything. They're going to do all these things. And we hear feedback like that. But the cases that we hear feedback on are the ones that fit into this category. It's like what you're actually billed for and what you actually pay are never the same things almost, in this scenario. So especially when we're getting that kind of negative feedback, the people who have paid every time that have complaints about bills, we almost always work through those with them and work on those issues. But in the situations like this, that's what we deal with so often. And, still dollars, I mean, pennies on those dollars that we'd probably be okay with doing with these, but we just have so many that sit out there, and then figuring out, what that process is like is something that, like I said, we could spend a lot more time on, but won't do it today. I do want to touch on one final thing from my standpoint before we wrap up today. I would say that we do a really good job overall of tracking numbers firm-wide. The weekly sheets that we do as individuals in terms of what they do, and then from the firm-wide, this scorecard that we just showed, those reports are part of the best, probably the best part of my week each week is looking at that and breaking it down. And I spend a lot of time in them. What has not been the best part of those weeks for years now, really since we made the transition, even before Clio, I know it was even more difficult then. But for me to run a report that says, hey, here's what everybody in the firm billed and collected last week, that's like a 2-hour process right now for us, which is one thing that has been really, really challenging. There are fantastic dashboards that Clio has that you can look at with a click and say, hey, here's where everybody is. But in terms of these big picture numbers, it's really hard to get that focus. And that's one of the things that we are, working to improve, I think, not just for this challenge, because one of the ways that we would like to break that down, which we've not been able to do as easily, we can on appointments, but on collections amount, it's more difficult. We can know what appointment was a Mecklenburg County appointment or a Buncombe County appointment if they went to the office, but even that's an issue when it comes to phone consults too. So, we have all those parts that factor in, but we have partnered, we're going to be using, just another tool. If somebody's listening that's in this scenario, another tool in the tool belt. We're very pleased with the early feedback here. That's Law KPI, which does some reporting, and they have standard reports that they do, kind of at your fingertips all the time, which we are hoping is going to turn that 2 hours into 5 minutes in terms of that long-term reports. And they also do some custom build outs that we're going to implement too, which I think will be a really big piece of that puzzle for us moving forward in terms of where we're not spinning our wheels and wasting a lot of time on these things.
Yeah, it really is awesome that we are able to not only just practice law by looking at these 7 numbers, but we have such an awesome team that spends hours putting this thing together. Kimberly Mullinax, our general manager, Debbie Gaddis, who is I'm not exactly sure what her title is. I call her Jonah Hill from Moneyball. She does all of our numbers. She gives us all of the information that we need. Cindy Andrews, our financial director, Leslie Wall, our controller, uh, Linda, who is constantly working on our leads and our conversion rates. We just have an awesome group and team that produces this number for us each week. And we are so lazy that we actually have them put it in green if they've made it, yellow if it's close, and red if we missed it. Um, because I want it so simple that I could just glance and just see, is it all green? Is it, what's red? Because we can have a great revenue week and be down because we know what our leading indicator numbers are. If we're not where we want to be on leads, we may have had a great week revenue wise, but we're going to be concerned because we're thinking, well, that's a good indicator about where we're going to be in 3 months. And if you as a business cannot operate thinking about the future, I mean, revenue, even on a weekly basis, is a number of the past. So I'm really pumped up about it. We're going to dig into these numbers on an individual base next week and see where we are.
Yeah, we'll try to come up with a little spreadsheet here for that for Charlotte and Nashville. So give you a little look on the progress too. But I think that's going to wrap it up. We're right against our time, and we'll see you again next week.
See you guys.